Hi, my name's Rich Stalls. We are looking at the SCORM Integration Kit for Unity3D. Today we're looking at episode 4 in the tutorial series, looking how you can integrate your project into Unity3D with SCORM. So let's look at the overview of what's going on today. So we're going to look at how you can set up your scene in Unity3D. We're going to look at the startup workflow of what occurs when the app first loads. We'll look at how you might integrate your particular project with the integration kit and how it might communicate back to the LMS, and the kinds of things that have to occur on the application's close down for the integration kit to write successfully back to the learning management system. So don't forget, this is part of a tutorial series. Check out the rest of them on the Technology Toolkit channel there. And I'd be really interested to see what you guys are doing with the integration kit. Just pop a comment down below and we can keep track of what is going on out there. So let's look at setting up your scenes. So when you want to integrate the SCORM kit with your code, you have to set up the scene in a specific way because of the way that the integration kit has been architected. And you basically just use the new SCORM menu that will appear in the Unity3D editor. Click on SCORM and then click on the Create SCORM Manager button. Now this will create a new game object in your hierarchy there called SCORM Manager. You can see that on the left-hand side. So basically, how you set up your scene is you use that there to set up the SCORM Manager, which is basically a SCORM Manager CS file, the script file there attached to a game object. And in the hierarchy, that's where you place your controller beneath that. And that is because the SCORM Manager script actually broadcasts several messages that your controller will have to respond to, and that's how you position it in the hierarchy there for that to occur. So I'll just show you that in the editor. At the top here, SCORM, create the SCORM Manager. We'll actually create this object here on the left. So once that's all set up, we'll look at now the startup workflow that occurs when the app loads. Now, you know the inbuilt function start that you have in your code to kick things off. Well, that actually gets run by the SCORM Manager itself. So the SCORM Manager responds to the start function there. It initializes the learning management system connection. Then it loads the data from the learning management system into the student record object. And then it broadcasts the SCORM initialize complete message to your code. And that's where your code will respond to it. Now, we will look into the code in just a minute as an example. We'll be using the inbuilt test app that comes with the integration kit. So you can see the kinds of thing that's been put into action in the code. Now, your controller will not use the start function. In fact, you'll move all of your code from the start function into the SCORM initialize complete. This is because you don't want to be starting to process and interact with the user until a valid connection with the learning management system is happening, and we need to receive that from the SCORM Manager. So once you've responded to the SCORM initialize complete function and set up any of your own variables there, you'll also process any data for the learning management system here. So let's actually jump across to the screen there and have a look at this in practice. So we're looking over here at the SCORM Manager functions under scripts, SCORM Manager. So we'll go ahead and load up Visual Studio. Now this is the SCORM Manager file. So you can see here, we'll scroll down to the start function. Importantly, it just calls another initialize function. So we'll jump down to there. Now you can see initialize sets a few things there, but it does call the API wrapper, the SCORM API wrapper's initialize function. So let's just have a look at what that is. And basically what that does is establishes, calls the doIsSCORM 2004 function call in the SCORM JavaScript that sits in your web app, and that basically initializes that connection back to the LMS. So it initializes the connection. Next step is it actually loads all of the data from the learning management system into the student record. So I'm going to pause here. I'm going to go back to our slides here for a second and remind ourselves a bit about the communication workflow and the way that the LMSs are built around the SCORM standard. So you can see on the right hand side that the learning management system has this concept of every time that a learner loads up a new session with your SCORM enabled app, it creates a new student record which includes details about the learner and their preferences, but also the details of that particular session's interactions and scores and completion status. So to reflect that, the SCORM manager also loads all of that student record data into the student record object. Now, that object contains all of the student information about the student, such as the student's ID, first name, and some of the preferences, but it also contains all of the interactions that your app will record. And that is done so that it reflects the way that the LMS uses the SCORM standard. So we'll jump back across to the editor here, and as you can see, it does load the student record. So let's have a look at what that looks like, that function here, load student record. This is a part of the SCORM manager script, and as you can see, it creates the new student record object. It gets the version, and it starts fetching a whole bunch of data, anything that's possibly available from the learning management system. Now, if this is the first time that a student has run your, if this is a new session, this is a brand new attempt, is probably what many of the learning management systems call it, there will be only a few items set, and it's typically around the student's ID, name, and some of its preferences. Any sort of results and scores, comments, and data of that nature will not be set because this is their first attempt. However, many of the learning management systems allow the student to launch a previous attempt in a way that they can go review their performance. And if the student launches your app based on a previous attempt, all of this data will be set as well. So let's just go jump back up to the top there. So initializing, you can see it initialized the connection to the LMS, then it loads all the student data from the LMS, and once that's processed, it broadcasts a message down the hierarchy, and it's designed for your code then to pick that up. So let's just jump back to the slides here, and we can see that we're up to step 4 on the SCORM manager. It's finished. It's sending that broadcast message, SCORM initialize complete. So now we want to look at your code. Controller main is the we'll look back at here. The controller main is my controller for this particular scene's part of the web app. So this controller main would be your code that you're integrating with the Unity Integration Kit. So in the example app, what I've got here is, you can see here's the SCORM initialize complete function. It's a public void function so that it will respond to that broadcast message from the SCORM manager. So when that sends the broadcast message, it sends it, I catch it, and I start up my startup routine. And this is where I process any data from the LMS. So let's jump down here. You can see here I start populating my user interface with the learner's ID, the name, some of their preferences. Now in this particular one, it's designed so that we can explore the connections to the LMS. So I pretty much present every single piece of data that might possibly come from the LMS in my interface. Now typically you'd probably just worry about the student's name, maybe the ID. You might start responding to some of the preferences that might come from the learning management system, and that's pretty much where you get started from there. Maybe if this is a reviewed attempt, you might want to see if this is a complete attempt. For instance here, have they completed it, or it's incomplete, or it's not attempted? Basically, if it's anything there set, we want to maybe allow the students to look through their previous results rather than just take a new go at your web app. So that's the basics of that startup workflow that you can see. The SCORM manager initializes connection, loads up the data, and sends I've initialized complete broadcast message, and then you process that data. So communicating with the learning management system. So let's have a look back at the code here, back to what would be your controller code. Now this is where, let's scroll down, this is where once you've initialized, your app is running. Now at certain points in the workflow of your app, you'll be wanting to store information back to the LMS, and we'll just look for example here. There might be some time where the score needs to be set, and in this instance, in this particular web app, that gets triggered whenever I've actually changed the score by hand. There's no real sort of activities or interactions beyond actually just typing into a text box. But this is, for instance, if we'll go back down here, for instance, if the score got set, we would calculate what the scaled score is, and then we call the score manager, and we call a function called set score scaled, and we send that back to it. Now that score manager, let's have a look at the matching function score manager. It receives that float value. It knows what the SCORM standard identifier is. It converts your float value to what the call needs to be, which is a string. Then it also updates the student record so that the student record is in sync with what we're about to send to the learning management system, and then it sends the actual value to the learning management system via the API wrapper. So this is basically the workflow. There's a whole bunch of different functions that we can do there. I'll show you where you can actually find out some more information about what kinds of functions you need to call, and with some work through examples of how you might use those functions. So if you go to SCORM, click on the help item, you'll go to the SCORM Integration Kit help site or support site. Halfway down the page, there's a link to the class documentation, which is online. And you can see here under classes, there's all the files that are included, but the score manager is the one we want to look at. And you can see there's a few familiar functions there. But for example, if another use case might be adding an interaction, we might want to actually store a result of the student has interacted with a particular quiz question, we want to store that to the LMS. We would use the add interaction function. So looking at that, we can see here there's a few parameters, one of which is a student learner interaction record. And here's an example of the usage you might use there. You would create a new local record, which is of the type, the student record learner interaction record type. You would set the interaction type, other. There might be, I think there's some things like multiple choice is one of them. You need to set its date, its weighting, the response, how long the latency, how long the student took to actually answer that question, what the item that you're recording sort of text description is, and also what the result was. Was that incorrect, correct? And also this one here is not used in most of the function types here. It's very unclear of what different learning management systems are expecting this particular part of the standard to mean. So once you've set up all the details of a learner interaction record, you call the add interaction to the SCORM manager, which stores it back to the LMS. And I'll show you there, for example, we'll go back to the code. Add interaction, and you can see here this is the SCORM manager's response to that, and here it is. It will be doing a whole bunch of stuff, which is setting a unique interaction ID, which has to be unique to the system there, to this particular student record, and then it begins to store all the parts of the record into the LMS. And again, keeping the student record in synchronization with what's going on there. Setting a whole bunch of values depending on what we have set as a part of that. So it might be as basic as setting just a single score to setting interactions. Let's just find add interaction here. The way that this particular piece of code has processed it, it reads some stuff from my interface into some variables there. It processes some of it there, some validation at the top. If it's valid, it begins to, as you can see, it creates a new interaction record, and it uses the student record to help do that. So I don't have to get right into the nitty-gritty of individual set value calls. I can just create a new record, set the parameters, set the details there, and then call the SCORM manager add interaction to send that interaction. So have a look through at how this particular web app does a whole lot of those things. But anytime you need to store information back to the LMS, there's a range of functions which we saw here in the documentation of how we might send and receive information using the SCORM manager. So let's look at the closing workflow. So once the session has come to an end, it's time to close down your web app. There's a specific workflow that needs to go through before any of the data actually gets finalized into the LMS. Although during the session you have been using the SCORM manager to set and add details, which in turn calls a send value function call to their learning management system. It doesn't in effect get written finally until we go through this closing workflow steps. So when your app is ready to close down, you need to do 3 initial steps. You need to set the session time, you need to set an exit type, and then you need to call the commit function on the SCORM manager. The SCORM manager processes that commit function, and once we've got a response from the learning management system, it sends back a broadcast message, SCORM commit complete, to let our code know that it's been successfully saved and stored into the learning management system. Once we receive that, our code just has to call one last function call to the SCORM manager, which is that of terminate, which actually sends a message to the learning management system saying this session is completely finished, and typically it just closes the browser window. So let's have a look at the code here. We have, in this particular example app, when a learner clicks a button, which gets responded to by this function here, button exit SCORM pressed, you can see I call those 3 steps that we looked at in here. I set the session time, I set the exit, and then I call commit. Now, the function here, commit, in turn calls the commit function to the API wrapper, waits for a result, and then, if all is well, it sends the SCORM commit complete broadcast message down the line. And this is what our code will respond to. And as you can see here, I just respond to it with a terminate call, and which in turn tells the LMS I am completely finished, and it will close down the session, the browser window, etc. So that's the basics of how you integrate through using the SCORM Integration Kit, your code to be able to interact with the learning management system. Now, the next tutorial session will look briefly at how you will build your web app using the SCORM Integration Kit, and how you will package it up into a SCORM compliant zip file, and how you might load that up into a learning management system. And we'll use Blackboard Learn Ultra for that. And I look forward to seeing you next time.